This documentary doesn't aim for spectacle, it aims for clarity. Every word has been carefully researched and every claim verified. If you're here for deep, honest history, you're in the right place. Our topic for today is Roman roads. You've heard the phrase, all roads lead to Rome. That wasn't just a saying, it was a geographic reality. Roman surveyors and engineers built one of the most extensive and lasting road networks in history. Over 400,000 kilometers, or roughly 250,000 miles. These roads weren't just for travel. They were instruments of control, communication, trade, and empire. In this documentary, we'll explore how these roads were made, what materials were used, how the terrain was conquered, and how this network shaped not only the Roman world, but the one that came after it. From construction methods to legal systems, from milestones to the soldiers who built them, we'll go beneath the surface, literally and historically. Every chapter of this documentary is built on primary sources and modern scholarship. The details may surprise you, but they won't mislead you. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The First Stones. Before there were empires, there were paths, traces worn into the ground by footsteps and hoofbeats. In early Italy, people moved through forests, over hills, and along riverbanks using whatever routes the terrain allowed. These were not roads in the Roman sense, they were simply the spaces between obstacles. But when Rome began to rise, so did its demand for something more permanent. Roman roads did not begin as grand projects. They started as military necessities. Rome, in its early years, was not yet an empire, but a regional power surrounded by rivals. In the 4th century BCE, during its wars with the Samnites and other central Italian tribes, the Republic realized it needed a way to move troops quickly, efficiently, and in any season. Mud trails and rocky footpaths would not suffice. Something more reliable was needed. The first major breakthrough came in 312 BCE with the construction of the Via Appia. Commissioned by the censor Appius Claudius Caecus, this road connected Rome to Capua, deep in the south of Italy. It was revolutionary not only because of its scale, but because of its permanence. This was not a dirt track. It was layered, paved, and engineered, designed to endure. The Via Appia laid the blueprint for everything that followed. The Romans didn't invent roads, but they invented a system of roads. Roads that were straight, wide, layered, and legal. Roads that were designed to connect cities, supply lines, forts, and frontiers. From that point forward, every major Roman military or political campaign was followed by, or even preceded by, a road. The early construction techniques were already remarkably advanced. A standard Roman road began with a deep trench cut into the earth. The base layer was usually large stones or rubble. Above that came a layer of gravel mixed with lime or sand, packed tightly to form a solid surface. The final layer was usually made of polygonal basalt stones, carefully shaped and fitted together. In Latin, this finished surface was called the via strata, the origin of our modern word street. Even in these early stages, Roman road building showed its genius in gradient control and drainage. Roads were slightly crowned in the middle, so rain would run off to the sides. Ditches were dug along the edges to channel excess water away. Curbstones lined the road to mark boundaries and hold everything in place. The width of roads varied depending on purpose. Main trunk roads were often between 4 and 6 meters wide, roughly 13 to 20 feet, wide enough for 2 carts to pass. In narrow mountain passes, roads could shrink to under 2 meters, while near cities they often expanded into large paved areas for markets or military mustering. Another key feature of early roads was their straightness. Roman engineers preferred direct lines, even if it meant cutting through hills or building bridges. This was a practical decision. A straight road was faster to build, easier to navigate, and harder to ambush. In Italy's rugged terrain, this sometimes meant enormous effort, blasting through volcanic rock or building over marshes with wooden pile foundations. The people who built these early roads were usually soldiers. During peacetime, legions were often assigned construction duties. Roads, walls, and fortresses were all part of Roman military logistics. As road building became more institutionalized, local labor and slaves were also used, but the military origin of the system never disappeared. Roads were built for war, and their design reflected it. By the end of the 3rd century BCE, Rome's core road network had already begun to take shape. Roads led to every region of Italy, from the Ligurian coast in the north to the heel of the peninsula in the south. Cities were laid out along these roads. Trade began to follow them. Communication sped up, and so did control. These early roads made the conquest of the Mediterranean possible. They allowed Rome to respond quickly to rebellion, to move grain and metal from the provinces, to extend its reach not just through force, but through presence. The first stones of Roman roads weren't just a construction project. They were a declaration. Rome was not just expanding. Rome was arriving. And wherever the roads were laid, Roman power followed. Chapter 2. Cutting through the land. The Roman world was not flat, and the roads that connected it could not simply follow the easiest paths. Hills, swamps, cliffs, rivers, forests, the terrain of the empire was varied and often difficult. But where others might have detoured or delayed, Rome adapted. The builders of its roads saw geography not as a barrier, but as a challenge to overcome. To understand how Roman roads truly shaped the empire, we need to look beyond their surfaces. It was in the surveying, cutting, bridging, and draining that the Romans left their signature. They didn't just lay stones across landscapes, they modified the landscapes themselves. Before any construction began, Roman surveyors known as grammatici walked the proposed route. Using tools like the groma and chorobates, they measured angles, slopes, and elevations. The groma, a vertical pole with cross-shaped arms and plumb lines, allowed them to align perfectly straight lines even across uneven ground. The chorobates, essentially a leveling bench with a built-in water channel, helped ensure consistent gradients. These were simple tools, but they produced impressively accurate results. A Roman road could run straight for dozens of kilometers, or miles, while maintaining a consistent and safe slope for carts and foot traffic. Once the path was chosen, the labor began. In rocky areas, workers cut into the hillsides using picks and chisels. When they encountered steep slopes, they carved terraces or built retaining walls. In soft or marshy ground, roads were raised on agger, which were embankments of packed earth, gravel, and stone. These not only lifted the road above floodwaters, but also helped with visibility and drainage. Drainage was critical. Without it, roads would collapse over time. Roman builders incorporated side ditches, culverts, and even underground channels to keep the surface dry. Roads were built with a slight curve from center to edge, called a camber, so that rainwater would run off naturally. Even in areas where the terrain seemed flat, the Romans created subtle slopes to ensure runoff. One remarkable example of terrain adaptation was in swampy regions like the Pontine Marshes, southeast of Rome. Here, the Via Appia crossed ground that was soft and often flooded. Rather than reroute, Roman engineers drove wooden piles deep into the mud to form a stable base, then layered gravel and stone on top. This kind of foundation work allowed roads to pass through areas that would otherwise have been impassable. Bridges were another essential solution. Rivers couldn't be crossed by ford alone, especially in the rainy seasons. Roman bridges were built from stone, brick, or concrete, often using semicircular arches. They ranged in size from simple culverts to massive crossings like the Pont du Gard in modern-day France, which combined an aqueduct with a roadway. Some bridges were high and arched to allow boat passage, others low and wide for flood resistance, and many of them still stand today, a testament to their strength. In mountainous terrain, roads were cut directly into the rock, sometimes with switchbacks or carved ledges along cliffsides. The Via Flaminia, which ran north through the Apennines, included tunnels and carved sections through the hills. In places where the gradient was unavoidable, stairways were sometimes added for foot traffic, with separate lanes for carts and animals. Roman engineers didn't just accept the terrain, they transformed it. But none of this work was easy. It required thousands of labourers, including soldiers, enslaved people, and local populations compelled by Roman authority. The work was often grueling, but it was systematic. Materials were moved efficiently, sites were coordinated by military standards, and progress was tracked with discipline. The result was a road system that moved through every type of land, not around it. This gave Rome a level of mobility no rival could match. Armies could march in formation, merchants could travel year-round, and information could cross entire provinces in a matter of days. Terrain became a problem only once. After that, it became a route. Chapter 3. Layers of Strength. A Roman road may appear simple from above. Flat stones stretching in a straight line. But beneath the surface was a system of layers, each with a purpose. It was this hidden engineering that made the roads endure for centuries, sometimes even into the modern era. Their strength came not just from stone, but from structure. Roman engineers thought vertically as much as they thought forward. The surface was only the top of a much deeper build. At the base of each road was a trench, sometimes as deep as a metre, cut into the earth and adjusted for local soil conditions. Into that trench, several layers were placed in a specific order, a design that combined flexibility, drainage, and strength. The lowest layer was called the statumen. This was made of large stones or rubble, often fist-sized or larger. It served as a foundation, distributing the weight of traffic and anchoring the road against erosion. In particularly soft or unstable soils, these stones could be packed more deeply to compensate for shifting ground. Above the statumen came the rudus, a mixture of crushed stones and lime. This created a kind of rough concrete. It was laid in multiple courses, often 20 to 30 centimetres thick, and pounded flat using heavy tools. The lime gave it cohesion. The crushed stone allowed drainage. Together they formed a semi-solid platform. Next came the nucleus, a finer layer of gravel or compacted sand, sometimes mixed with clay or volcanic ash. This layer was smoother, more stable, and served as a base for the final surface. In urban areas or high-traffic routes, it was sometimes reinforced with additional lime mortar to form a hardened subfloor. Finally came the surface, or summum dorsum. This was made of stone paving blocks, usually basalt, but sometimes limestone or granite, depending on region. These stones were not just dropped into place. They were carved and shaped to interlock. Their surfaces were slightly convex to shed water, and the spaces between them were often filled with gravel or fine earth to limit shifting. The total thickness of a Roman road could range from 60 centimetres to over a metre, depending on terrain and importance. Heavily trafficked roads like the Via Appia were particularly robust. Some rural or secondary roads used fewer layers or thinner construction, but the basic formula remained. One of the most ingenious parts of Roman road design was its modularity. The same layered system could be scaled up or down, depending on budget, geography, and strategic importance. This made the road system both standardized and adaptable, a rare combination in ancient infrastructure. Roads were usually flanked by curbstones to hold the layers in place. Beyond these were drainage ditches, and often pedestrian paths on either side. In cities, sidewalks were common. In the countryside, the roads might include laybys or stopping points for carts and animals. This wasn't just a surface to walk on, it was a designed environment. Durability was a core goal. Roman engineers built roads not for quick access, but for long-term function. Some surfaces have remained usable for nearly 2,000 years. Not because the materials were magical, but because the design was layered, deliberate, and rooted in practical knowledge. Today, when archaeologists excavate ancient roads, they often find that the upper stones are gone, reused in later buildings, but the underlying layers remain intact. The rudus and nucleus hold their form. The statumen still supports the trench. Even in places where modern roads have been built directly on top of Roman ones, the original layers are sometimes still there, silently bearing the weight of passing cars. The genius of Roman roads wasn't just in their direction or reach, it was in their structure, a structure designed not for ease, but for endurance. One that worked with gravity, water, and time, not against them. They weren't just roads, they were foundations. Chapter 4: Milestones and Measurement. To build an empire, Rome needed more than roads. It needed to measure them. From the earliest stages of expansion, the Romans understood that distance mattered, not just for armies and merchants, but for taxes, for communication, and for control. A road that could not be measured could not be managed. So, alongside the stones and trenches, the Romans placed something deceptively simple: the milestone. These were not small markers. A typical Roman milestone, or miliarium, stood between 1.5 and 3 meters tall, often made from stone, with inscriptions carved directly into its face. The text usually included the name of the emperor or official who commissioned the road, the total distance from a fixed point, and sometimes the names of the nearest towns or termini. The point from which all Roman road distances were measured was the Miliarium Aureum, or golden milestone. It stood in the Roman Forum, placed there by Emperor Augustus around 20 BCE. Though the original no longer survives, ancient writers tell us it was clad in bronze or gilded metal, a shining symbol of Rome as the centre of the known world. All distances across the empire were said to lead back to that central point. The standard unit of measurement was the Roman mile, or mil passus, meaning 1,000 paces. This measured roughly 1,480 meters, a bit shorter than the modern mile of 1,609 meters, but long enough to cover the stride of a soldier marching in formation. Surveyors marked these miles carefully, using chains, rods, and trained pacing to keep the measurements consistent across provinces. Milestones were placed at regular intervals, usually one per Roman mile. Over time, they became more than just markers. They were announcements. Each stone was a miniature monument to Roman authority, stamped with the emperor's name and a message. This road, this land, this system, it belongs to Rome. Some milestones included the phrase via munita, meaning road built. Others recorded repairs, dates, and who paid for the work. This made them early forms of infrastructure documentation, publicly visible and difficult to forge. In the provinces, milestones helped Roman administrators calculate travel times, organize courier systems, and distribute resources. They were also crucial for military logistics. Supply wagons moved on timetables, and legions could be dispatched based on precise marching distances. A well-marked road was a reliable one. The imperial courier system, the cursus publicus, relied on these distances. Couriers, or tabellari, carried messages between cities at remarkable speeds. With fresh horses and rest stops spaced by the mile, messages could travel hundreds of kilometers, or miles, in days. This system gave Rome a strategic advantage, not just in war, but in administration. Orders could be issued, updated and enforced faster than in most ancient civilizations. Even civilians used the milestones. Merchants, pilgrims, and travellers used them to estimate how far they had come and how far they had to go. Guidebooks and itineraries, like the Itinerarium Antonini, listed towns and distances along major routes. It was, in many ways, the beginning of mapped travel. Today, thousands of Roman milestones survive. Some remained standing along ancient roads. Others are kept in museums. Their inscriptions have helped historians reconstruct lost road networks and understand the pace of Roman expansion. They are among the most durable records of Roman administration. Not scrolls, not speeches, but carved stone standing in open air. The roads connected the empire. The milestones measured it. They made the invisible visible. They showed travellers where they were and reminded them who had made the road beneath their feet. Every empire builds, but few measure so carefully. Fewer still leave markers that can outlast the centuries. Chapter 5. Roads of War. Behind every Roman road was a strategy, and behind every strategy was war. Though these roads would later carry merchants, pilgrims, and civilians, their original purpose was military. They were built to move legions, quickly, efficiently, and without delay. In a world where the speed of a column could determine the fate of a province, roads became weapons. The connection between Roman roads and military expansion is not a theory. It is historical fact. The earliest roads in Italy were commissioned during military campaigns, and their routes aligned with strategic needs. The Via Appia, for example, was created during the Samnite Wars to supply troops in southern Italy. As Rome's borders expanded, roads followed, cutting through forests, across plains, over mountains, always aimed at reinforcing control. A Roman legion on the march could travel between 25 and 30 kilometers per day, or about 15 to 18 miles. With a well-built road underfoot, that number could be sustained for weeks. Roads allowed entire armies to arrive at trouble spots faster than enemies could prepare. In many cases, they allowed Rome to win wars before battles even began. These military roads were not temporary tracks. They were permanent fixtures, signs that Rome intended to stay. And unlike some modern military infrastructure, which may disappear after a conflict, Roman roads often became the backbone of regional life. What began as a supply line became a trade route. What served legions later served cities, but while legions marched on them, they also built them. The Roman army was one of the largest public works forces in history. During peacetime or between campaigns, soldiers were frequently put to work on infrastructure. Roads, bridges, walls, and forts were constructed under military supervision. This was not punishment, it was policy. Legionaries received training in basic engineering, surveying, and masonry. Each unit carried tools, and Roman camps were often organized like mobile construction sites. Orders for road construction came from generals, governors, or directly from Rome. The army's involvement ensured discipline, logistics, and consistency. This is part of why the road network expanded so quickly and reliably. Strategically, roads were designed to serve more than just movement. They helped with communication. Military dispatches moved via couriers along fixed routes. Riders had access to mutations, posting stations where they could change horses, and mansions, where they could rest and resupply. These were placed at intervals of roughly 15 to 25 kilometers, or 9 to 15 miles, depending on the terrain. Roads also served surveillance. Patrols could move along them to inspect territories, respond to uprisings, or escort prisoners. They connected fortresses to each other, allowing garrisons to coordinate over vast distances. In frontier zones, roads often ran parallel to defensive walls, like Hadrian's Wall in northern Britain. These allowed troops to be redeployed rapidly in case of attack. Many roads had milestones and route markers customized for military use. Some even included designated turning points or rest zones for baggage trains. In hostile territories, construction was done under guard, and temporary forts were built along the way. It's important to remember that the roads themselves were sometimes as intimidating as the soldiers who used them. Their appearance signaled Roman control. Their permanence sent a message. This land is no longer yours. It belongs to something larger. Something organized, prepared, and built to last. Even rebellions followed the roads. Revolts in Gaul, Judea, and North Africa often unfolded along the same lines that Rome had laid. Rebels used the roads because they were the fastest routes, even when fighting the power that built them. Over time, as regions pacified, many of these roads remained in service. They became part of the provincial landscape, but their origins were never erased. Underneath every wagon wheel and merchant caravan was the echo of marching boots. Roman roads were instruments of peace only because they had first been instruments of war. Chapter 6. From Village to Empire. Rome's roads were more than just strategic tools or military infrastructure. Over time, they became the blueprint for urban life across the empire. Towns, trade routes, and even entire provinces were reorganized to align with them. What began as lines scratched across the map eventually became the map itself. In early Italy, settlements often developed near rivers or hilltops, places that offered water, security, or farmland. But, as Roman roads spread outward, new towns began forming along their edges. The road dictated not only where people moved, but also where they lived. In many cases, small villages grew into towns simply because the road passed through them. The Romans had a word for these junction towns, mansiones or mutationes, originally referring to relay or rest stops along official routes. Over time, these places developed housing, markets, and temples. A one-night stopover could evolve into a permanent settlement. This was not accidental, it was systemic. Roads acted like infrastructure veins, and the empire's growth followed their direction. This pattern repeated itself across regions, from the forests of Gaul to the deserts of Syria. In Britain, towns like Londinium and Verulamium expanded rapidly thanks to their position on Roman roads. In North Africa, cities such as Timgad were laid out in perfect grid formations, with their main streets aligned to the Roman road network. These weren't just settlements, they were planned extensions of Roman presence. At the heart of most Roman towns were two roads, the Cardo Maximus, running north-south, and the Decumanus Maximus, running east-west. These axes formed the backbone of the city grid. Shops, forums, and baths were arranged along them. Even in cities that predated Rome's conquest, roads were often rebuilt or redirected to match Roman standards. Urban life became structured, predictable, and uniform, no matter how distant a city was from the capital. Roads also helped standardize economic activity. Farmers could sell their goods further afield. Traders connected distant markets. A craftsman in Spain could send his wares to Gaul, and a merchant from Egypt could reach the frontiers of Germania. Roads made these exchanges practical. They lowered the cost of transport and, in many cases, reduced the risks of theft and delay. As the saying went, civitas sine via, civitas nulla. A city without a road is no city at all. Taxes and census data moved along the roads. Imperial agents collected grain, wine, oil, and silver, the lifeblood of Roman finance, by way of the road system. In return, the roads themselves were maintained, expanded, or rebuilt using that same tax revenue. Roads were not just a public service, they were a financial circuit. The legal system followed the roads too. Roman law allowed for property claims, contracts, and even marriage rights to be recognized across distances. Because the roads ensured consistency. A contract signed in Antioch could be enforced in Ravenna. A man arrested in Carthage could be transported to Rome within weeks. Roads gave empire to law and gave law to the empire. Even culture flowed along the roads. Latin became a shared language. Roman customs, religious practices, clothing styles, and architecture spread with movement. Soldiers posted in the far north adopted the same rituals as those in the south. The empire did not simply expand in territory, it expanded in identity. Roads made that possible. Today, satellite imagery still reveals the outlines of Roman towns that followed road alignments. Fields in France, Italy, and Britain are still shaped by Roman grids. In some places, modern highways run exactly along Roman routes, because the logic of those roads remains sound. The Romans didn't just build for their present, they built for the future. And their roads were not a side project of empire. They were the structure on which empire was built. Chapter 7. Roads beyond Rome. Roman roads were designed to reach the edges of the empire, but their story did not end there. Even after Rome fell, the roads remained. Some were repaired, others were forgotten and then rediscovered. In many cases, they became the foundations of entirely new eras, inherited by kingdoms, copied by empires, and revived by engineers centuries later. The collapse of the Western Roman Empire in the 5th century CE did not mean the roads disappeared. In fact, some of them became even more important. As centralized Roman authority faded, local rulers, bishops, and merchants relied on these ancient routes to keep regions connected. The roads outlasted the empire because they had become part of the land itself. In Britain, for example, after the Roman withdrawal in 410 CE, roads like Watling Street and Ermine Street continued to serve Anglo-Saxon and later Norman rulers. Medieval armies marched on them. Trade goods still moved along their lengths. In Italy and Gaul, Roman roads became pilgrimage routes. The Via Francigena, which led from Canterbury to Rome, followed sections of Roman pavement. Even as cities shrank and knowledge faded, the roads remained useful. In the Byzantine East, the road system was preserved and maintained in key regions. Constantinople inherited more than just the eastern provinces. It inherited their infrastructure. Roads were critical in Asia Minor, the Balkans, and Syria, where imperial armies still moved along routes first paved by Roman legions. Some Roman bridges in Anatolia were restored multiple times across centuries and are still used today. As the medieval period progressed, many ancient roads were buried by time, soil, or the repurposing of their stones. Yet the routes themselves persisted. New roads often followed the old ones. In mountainous areas, Roman switchbacks and cuttings were simply too well engineered to ignore. When early modern states began organizing postal routes in the 16th and 17th centuries, many of the paths were reactivated Roman roads. Even in the Renaissance, Roman road building was a model. Engineers rediscovered ancient texts like Vitruvius's De Architectura, which described materials, gradients, and measurements. Thinkers like Leon Battista Alberti and Leonardo da Vinci studied Roman infrastructure as part of their investigations into geometry and architecture. The roads had become more than tools. They were symbols of lost knowledge and templates for rediscovery. The Enlightenment brought a more systematic study. Archaeologists, military historians, and mapmakers began documenting Roman roads across Europe and North Africa. In France, Napoleon's engineers explicitly traced parts of the Via Domitia to connect Marseille and Spain. In England, the Ordnance Survey used Roman routes as baselines for national mapping. In modern times, the influence of Roman roads is often invisible but profound. Highways and rail lines in Italy, Spain, and France still follow the gentle gradients and straight paths established 2,000 years ago. When infrastructure planners look for the most stable foundations, they often find them atop Roman agger, the raised embankments of ancient roads that continue to support weight without shifting. In North Africa, the remains of roads still run between ruined cities and desert forts. In the Balkans, GPS data has been used to align modern borders with ancient travel routes. In the Middle East, satellite surveys reveal Roman routes buried beneath sand, still perfectly straight after centuries of neglect. But perhaps most telling is that Roman roads have entered language and thought. The idea that all roads lead to Rome is more than historical, it's psychological. It speaks to the enduring belief that central order is possible, that the world can be connected, that planning and persistence can leave something behind. Even where Rome no longer ruled, its roads kept moving people, ideas, and goods. They made the ancient world smaller and the future more possible. Empires may fall, but roads, when built well, continue. Chapter 8. Roads of Stone and Spirit. To see a Roman road is to see the material power of an ancient empire. But to understand it fully, one must also grasp what it represented, not just physically, but symbolically. Roman roads were more than stone. They were ideology made solid. They reflected Roman order, control, and belief in permanence. In Roman religion and civic life, roads had spiritual and ceremonial value. They were not merely places for movement. They were sacred spaces. Some roads were consecrated by priests before being used. Major triumphal processions, the ceremonial parades awarded to victorious generals, moved along carefully chosen roads into the heart of Rome, especially the Via Sacra, the sacred way. This route passed through the Forum and up to the temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus, the symbolic heart of the city. Along these roads, generals displayed captured treasure, chained prisoners, and exotic animals. The procession was not just for spectacle. It was a statement. Rome's victories came from the gods, and the road to the gods led through the city itself. Roads became extensions of divine favor, linking earthly conquest with cosmic order. Outside Rome, roads also had connections to funerary practices. By law, Roman burials were not allowed inside the city. As a result, tombs and funerary monuments lined the roads leading outward. The Via Appia, for example, is famously flanked by ancient mausoleums and memorials. Travellers would pass reminders of the dead as they journeyed. Death was part of the landscape, and the road kept memory alive. There was also a legal sacredness to Roman roads. Damaging or obstructing them could be punished harshly. In some cases, magistrates declared them res publicor, public things, protected by law. This meant that they were not private property, nor could they be claimed or blocked without permission. The roads belonged to the people, and, in a sense, to the gods. Milestones themselves sometimes included religious dedications. Inscriptions invoked divine protection for the road, the emperor, or the empire. The act of maintaining the roads, viae munitae, was considered a civic and spiritual duty. Emperors who invested in roads, like Augustus, Trajan, or Hadrian, often connected their infrastructure programs to divine virtues such as virtus, pietas, and auctoritas. A strong road system was proof of a strong ruler, blessed by the heavens. Roads also shaped religious experience in more personal ways. Pilgrimage routes across the empire, to temples, oracles, or healing shrines, often followed Roman roads. In Asia Minor, pilgrims travelled to sanctuaries like Epidaurus or Didyma. In Egypt, processions followed old Roman routes to sacred Nile sites. These journeys were long, but the roads made them possible. In the Christian era, Roman roads took on new life. As the empire gradually converted, the road system became the highway of the new faith. Apostles, missionaries, and later bishops used the very same infrastructure to spread their message. Paul's letters, for example, refer to travel along familiar Roman routes. The ease of movement helped Christianity become not just a regional belief, but a transcontinental one. Even in the symbolic sense, roads took on Christian meaning. The idea of a spiritual path or way found resonance in the physical reality of Roman roads. The Greek term hodos, meaning road or way, appears repeatedly in early Christian texts to describe the journey of faith. The physical act of travelling a Roman road became intertwined with spiritual progress. By the Middle Ages, as pilgrimage grew in importance, Roman roads found new purpose. Some were renamed after saints, others were traced by religious orders. Monasteries were founded at road junctions. The roads had become more than instruments of empire. They were now spiritual corridors, used not to conquer, but to seek, to remember, to believe. In this sense, the Roman road endured in both stone and spirit. Its grooves held not only chariot wheels, but footsteps of faith, processions of memory, and echoes of prayers spoken over centuries. They bore the weight of empires, and the weight of hope. Chapter 9. The Builders. Roman roads stand today not only because of brilliant planning or durable materials, but because of the people who built them. Thousands of men, working over centuries, dug, measured, lifted, and paved the arteries of empire. Some were trained professionals, many were soldiers, others were slaves, labourers, or locals pressed into service. They left no grand monuments, but they left the roads we still walk. When a new road was planned, the first figures to arrive were the agrimensors, Roman land surveyors. They used tools like the groma and chorobates to measure straight lines and gradients. With remarkable accuracy, they charted paths across all kinds of terrain. Hills were climbed or carved through, valleys filled, rivers bridged, swamps drained. The routes they chose often defied obstacles rather than avoiding them. That's why Roman roads appear so straight. It was a statement of power, as much as efficiency. Once the path was surveyed, work began. In some cases, especially in provinces or frontier areas, the labour came from Roman legions themselves. Soldiers dug trenches, quarried stone, and laid foundations during peacetime. Road building was part of their training, a discipline that blended engineering with logistics. In this way, Rome's military might also become a construction force. But not all roads were built by soldiers. In the core of the empire and in long-settled regions, civilian contractors were often hired to do the work. These could be free workers or enslaved labourers owned by the state or wealthy landowners. In provinces, local communities were sometimes compelled to provide workforce or materials under laws like the munera system, unpaid public obligations imposed on cities and individuals. In return, the roads often brought them trade, travel, and access to imperial services. Each road section was built in layers: a trench, a foundation of large stones, a rough cement base, finer gravel, and then paving stones. This required tools, carts, cranes, and constant supervision. Foremen and engineers, often Roman citizens, coordinated the work, maintaining standards across regions. Inscriptions and surviving documents show that some large roads took years to complete, depending on their length and difficulty. Skilled stonemasons shaped the paving blocks, often on site. Others carved curbstones and drainage channels. In some cases, materials had to be transported great distances: volcanic ash from Campania, limestone from remote quarries, or timber for scaffolding and support. Roads were not built from what was nearby. They were built from what worked best. The work was brutal: heavy lifting, exposure to weather, risk of injury. These were daily realities. In provinces with extreme climates or rugged terrain, the job became even harder. And yet, the quality of construction remained high. Some Roman roads, laid 2,000 years ago, still show no significant sagging, thanks to the careful compacting of layers and smart use of materials. One remarkable example is the Via Traiana, built under Emperor Trajan in the early 2nd century CE. It offered a shorter route between Beneventum and Brundisium in southern Italy. Its construction required mountain cutting, bridge building, and complex planning. Yet it was completed in just a few years, a feat that reflected not just imperial will, but disciplined labour. The builders often left no names behind, but occasionally inscriptions recorded their presence. The legion that helped, the magistrate who funded it, the emperor who authorized it. These fragments are rare glimpses of the hands behind the stone. In a world without engines, electricity, or modern machines, these builders left behind a network that rivaled anything created before or since. Their legacy lies not in statues, but in paths still solid underfoot, worn smooth by time, but unbroken. The Roman road was a marvel of design, but without its builders, it would have remained an idea, not a structure. And though they are anonymous, their work speaks for them. Every road bears their imprint. Chapter 10. The End of the Road. Every road ends, but not every ending is a disappearance. Some roads fade slowly into the soil, buried beneath fields and cities. Others are reused, rebuilt, and renamed, never truly gone. The roads of Rome fall into both categories: vanishing and surviving, forgotten and eternal. By the late 4th and early 5th centuries CE, the Western Roman Empire was strained to its limits. Political instability, repeated invasions, and economic breakdowns chipped away at what had once been a tightly organized system. The roads, though still there, suffered with the institutions that built and maintained them. Maintenance declined. Repair crews were disbanded. Tax revenues that once funded public works were redirected to military defense or lost to corruption. Some roads became dangerous, patrolled by bandits, or left to overgrowth. Yet many continued to be used, especially near towns and along trade corridors. Rome's roads were resilient, far more than the politics that surrounded them. Some emperors tried to restore them. Theodosius, Honorius, and even late provincial governors made efforts to repair key sections. But the scale of the empire was too great and the fragmentation too deep. The old state roads became local ones. Some were taken over by bishops, monasteries, or landowners who maintained stretches near their holdings. In the Eastern Roman, or Byzantine, Empire, the roads lasted longer. Protected by stronger administration and a more centralized military, many routes in Asia Minor, the Levant, and the Balkans continued to be used well into the medieval period. Yet, even there, time eroded what politics could not. Roads cracked, stones sank, and slowly the pulse of movement changed. Still, the idea of Roman roads did not vanish. In the centuries that followed, as Europe rebuilt, Roman roads shaped what came next. The medieval network of trade fairs, markets, and pilgrimage routes often followed Roman alignments. So did royal postal systems in early France, Spain, and Germany. Many of these roadways were upgraded, but never replaced. Beneath the new layers was Rome. In England, roads like Fossaway, Watling Street, and Stane Street remained in use for centuries, sometimes marked by new milestones, sometimes by hedgerows and walking paths. In Spain, the Via Augusta eventually became the backbone of medieval Catalonia. In parts of North Africa and the Middle East, Roman roadbeds supported Islamic-era trade routes and pilgrimage corridors. The modern world, too, has inherited more than we often realize. Railways, highways, and city grids often follow Roman logic. Straight when possible, gradual when necessary, always connected. The Roman emphasis on survey, gradient, drainage, and scale lives on in engineering handbooks and infrastructure projects today. Even terms like via, strata, and milestone have found their way into dozens of modern languages. But legacy is not only technical, it is philosophical. Rome built roads not just to connect places, but to declare presence. Their roads reflected confidence, the belief that the world could be ordered, that movement could be controlled, that the future could be planned, and that belief has endured. Nations today still build with the same ambitions. Roads to connect capitals, roads to secure borders, roads to shape economies and influence history. The Romans did not invent roads, but they gave them a new purpose to hold an empire together across oceans, deserts, and mountains. In the end, the roads remain. Not always visible, not always whole, but always there. Under our cities, beneath our footsteps, within the patterns of our maps. The Roman roads are not gone. We're still walking them. Thank you for watching, or listening. This documentary has not relied on animation, reenactments, or cinematic spectacle. Instead, it's been built on something more enduring, the power of evidence, the weight of research, and the belief that history told clearly can be just as compelling as anything seen on screen. What you've heard here was the result of careful study. Every sentence was cross-checked against the best scholarship available: archaeological reports, ancient texts, modern academic analysis, to make sure that what we said could stand the test of time, just like the roads we explored. Roman roads are more than ancient ruins. They're part of the very structure of our modern world. They're under our highways, behind our city plans, inside the words we still speak. They remind us that even in stone, humans are capable of creating systems that outlive their makers. If you value documentaries that go deeper, that resist shortcuts and respect their audience, then we hope you'll consider supporting this channel. Subscribe, share, or simply take what you've learned and pass it on. History is not just something behind us. It's something we walk on every day. This is History's Edge.